Good afternoon and good evening to my European viewers, and good morning to my viewers in the Pacific Rim area. And welcome to a rather somber episode of The Angry Astronaut. This particular episode, of course, being a remembrance for those who perished on Challenger and Columbia. And the quote that I have included on this particular fundraiser, that we never forget our heroes, never take for granted, rather, the sacrifice of heroes, is the exact quote. That is not a very well known quote, and it's actually a quote in regards to the Columbia disaster from the late Senator John McCain, an individual who has admirers on both sides of the aisle, or had rather both admirers on both sides of the aisle politically, which is a very, very difficult thing to accomplish in American politics. And he said some very moving things about this particular event. And so, of course, you're talking about somebody who understands sacrifice. Senator McCain, who was a prisoner of war in a Vietnamese prisoner of war camp for many years, tortured and subjected to all sorts of horrible treatment for a considerable period of time. I think that he would be a fellow who would understand personal sacrifice, no matter what you think about politics. I think that there's lots of people who admire that individual, and so as a result, I thought I would use his quote for this particular fundraiser. So, what this video is all about, this is a fundraiser for the Astronaut Scholarship Fund. It's a very famous charity that is dedicated towards education, towards grooming a new crop of astronauts for the future, which means any super chats that come in, any donations whatsoever that come in for this particular video go directly into this charity. Also, for those of you watching a recorded version of this, I believe it's going to be monetized. If indeed it is monetized, all of the money from the monetization will also go into the charity. So there is, hopefully, I've set $1,000 goal for this. Obviously not today, but this is a fundraiser, a drive that's going to go until the end of February, and I'm hoping to raise $1,000 for this charity. Keep in mind that this is all tax deductible. That is something that a lot of people keep in mind as we get closer to tax time. You can write this off on your taxes. And of course, we would deeply appreciate it, because this is a moment that I think all of us have some sort of connection with. And that's one thing that I wanted to do today, was to and and also anger and frustration that we may have, sorry about the loss there, the anger and frustration that we may have received. And by the way, we've already gotten $25 donated. Thank you so much from Anton Nim and Darth Rust. You $75 raised. Wow, I don't know where it's all come from, but thank you so much. You are the best. Wow, it's coming in fast. It's coming in furious, and it's not what I expected right off the bat, given that times are tough right now. You guys are the most wonderful viewers on YouTube. Thank you so much for this support. Let's keep this going in the remembrance of these brave people. So before I go too much more into the details, let's go ahead and remember the individuals. First, I'm actually going to start off with the Columbia astronauts, the ones that are not as readily recognized: Rick Husband, Kalpana Chawla, Ilan Ramon, and I may be mispronouncing that name, I'm sorry, an Israeli astronaut, actually. That's the thing. Something that a lot of people don't remember is this was not exclusively an American tragedy. An Israeli also died in this particular incident. Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, William McCool. And then we move on to the Challenger victims, who was Ronald McNair, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Michael Smith, Gregory Jarvis, and then finally, of course, Krista McAuliffe. All of these heroes of the space program, heroes not just of America, but heroes of the world, as we have endeavored to explore the solar system, to explore the moon and low Earth orbit. Of course, there are those who lost their lives with Apollo 1 as well. We don't want to forget them. And certainly, of course, Russian cosmonauts who also lost their lives doing precisely the same thing. And, we don't want to forget them either. The reason why I'm bringing up these particular 14 is because of the particular connection that all of us, or most of us anyway, have some sort of connection to, because we should all remember, unless we're very very young, we should all remember at least what happened with Columbia, and certainly with Challenger. It's one of those huge moments in the history of the planet where we remember where we were. All of us remember where we were during 9/11. Those of us who are old enough remember the Kennedy assassination. I remember Challenger disaster as the first major worldwide catastrophe that people, has been seared into people's consciousness. I was just at home, and all of a sudden it just simply came on the news. It was as simple as that. And I feel bad about it, but I wasn't actually watching that particular launch. In Colorado, there's a substantial time difference for one thing, but I can't use that as an excuse. I had actually seen the second launch, or no, I'm sorry, the maiden launch of Columbia. I say second launch, but the maiden launch of Challenger, rather, of the Challenger space shuttle in person and up close, something that really blew my mind. So honestly, watching it on television, there was a sense of diminishment, especially when I was a teenager, after all. I was only 17 years old at the time. There was a sense of diminishment there in terms of, the kind of excitement, as opposed to experiencing it in person. And so as a result, I didn't even watch the event happen live. Instead, I heard instead I was hearing instead I heard about it almost immediately thereafter. And then my brother called. I don't recall exactly whether or not my brother watched the event live at his school. He was just a little kid at the time. Thank you, Anonymous, by the way, for your donation. Wow. Our donations are coming in fast on this. My brother was at school. He was at a Montessori school at the time, and I don't recall if he was watching it live. What I do know is that he and his teacher called me frantically because he was very young at the time and didn't know whether or not his uncle, my uncle George, who worked at the Cape, may have been hurt himself during the disaster. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding about what was happening. I assured my brother that the Challenger had exploded 3 miles up in the atmosphere, and so as a result, there was very little chance, if no chance at all, that anything would have happened to anyone on the ground. And that is something we also need to remember as being extremely important, is the fact that Challenger should have exploded on the pad. There should have been collateral damage at Cape Canaveral. It is just a miracle, an absolute miracle circumstance that prevented it from happening. The Morton Thiokol engineers, of course, Orbital ATK handles the solid rocket boosters these days, but it was Morton Thiokol at that time. All of them thought that the explosion was going to take place right as Challenger cleared the tower. And by the way, it was a universal consensus. Universal, guys. Everybody at Morton Thiokol, all the engineers who knew what they were doing, those people They simply knew that there was going to be an explosion because of the O-rings. They were completely convinced that because of the temperature that this was going to happen. And yet, unbelievably, it was simply inconceivable that this would happen, and a horrible example of hubris on the part of NASA officials that they made the decision to go ahead anyway in the face of a unanimous opinion from Morton Thiokol. And the reason, of course, was that there had been a number of incidents that had delayed the event already. Monetize mean YouTube, Google will donate their usual 30%. No, actually, what this means is that the super chats, all of the super chat goes into the charity. All of the fees and percentages is paid for by YouTube. So yeah, all of your money is going to the charity. Nothing is going to Google, my channel, anybody else. Of course, Google gets to write off their percentages that they're losing on there. They get to write that off as well on their taxes. So there is benefit to them, but they don't take a cut. So that's one thing we need to make sure about. Simon Folder, thank you so much for the 5 quid. Really do appreciate it. And wow, we're up to $173 raised already for this cause. It is blowing my mind. I never thought that this would be even remotely possible so quickly, but you guys are just awesome. It's obvious that you care very much about this particular issue and that it is that important. And it is, I'll tell you, it is a combination of tragic circumstances that led to this problem in the first place, because the previous incident that had been scrubbed, the previous launch that had been scrubbed by Challenger was scrubbed for the silliest reasons. They couldn't get the door fixed, and they sent out a crew to repair the door at the time as they were counting down, and that crew was driving right at the speed limit. A very difficult thing to understand. I mean, they were just crawling along to even arrive there on time. They couldn't fix the door in time. And so as a result, the launch was scrubbed that day. Had they been able to fix the door, those astronauts would not have died. It's as simple as that, because the temperature was right. And we got another donation, by the way, that just came in from Gary. I think it's Itano, that just came in. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, wow, generosity just coming through for this charity. You guys are the best, no doubt. So, really, but I mean, if it hadn't happened to Challenger, it would have happened to somebody, because that flaw with the O-rings was not being taken seriously enough. Shuttle launches had already taken place under temperatures and conditions that were not advisable given the state of the O-rings, and yet the warnings from the engineers were being ignored. And that is, frustrating beyond all belief. As I say, it was a lot of hubris on the part of NASA, on the part of people who really thought that we were invincible, and there simply is no excuse for it. And there's different opinions as to why Challenger did not blow up on the pad, but rather blew up several miles in the atmosphere. The disaster would have been far more significant if it had blown up on the pad. All of those people watching in the bleachers, by the way, they would have most probably been subjected to a shock wave from the explosion. Krista McAuliffe's parents might have been blown off of the bleachers by such an explosion if it had air bursted just over the pad. We actually dodged a huge bullet from what could have happened in that situation. NASA actually got lucky. Okay. Apparently, we are running into some more feed problems here. I do apologize, guys. It appears to be at my end. Not sure what's going on, so we're trying to figure it out. Once again, yes, $100 donation came in from Anonymous. Thank you so much. We are already almost one third of the way to our $1,000 goal, which, by the way, once again, to emphasize, I was, looking to achieve this goal by the end of February, not to get this far so fast on the first day. You guys are the best. You really are, doing all of this generosity in remembrance, of these brave people, of these heroes who sacrificed their lives for the future of space exploration. And what is tragic, what is more tragic about the Challenger disaster is not the fact that we had a school teacher involved. Obviously, that was tragic. An ordinary person who also died in front of so many school children. All of that was horrifically tragic. But what made it even worse was the fact that we had a second disaster that was completely avoidable. And this, of course, was the Columbia disaster. It took, of course, many, many more years after this, so many more successful launches, so many more, flawless missions that were carried out by the shuttle program. But then Columbia took off, and although it was not observed during the actual launch, after the launch, it was observed that a large piece of insulating foam had broken off of the fuel tank and struck the wing of the orbiter. Now, there had been these sorts of incidents that had occurred in the past, but never anything this big. It should have set off all kinds of warning bells at NASA. But instead, there was once again this hubris, this overconfidence, because Columbia lost heat tiles on its first mission. I remember, right after the launch, there was, camera images that were taken of numerous heat tiles that had fallen off the orbiter during the launch, heading into orbit, etc. There was a great deal of concern as to whether or not the orbiter was going to survive that very first mission. And the country and the world breathed a collective sigh of relief when the orbiter came down safely on the runway without any incident. And, orbiters had lost heat tiles prior to that without any problems. But guess what? It made everybody overconfident. It made the NASA officials overconfident. And so they didn't do any sort of in depth, detailed analysis or visual examination of what happened. Instead, what they did was mathematical projections of what this foam strike, what this debris strike would do to the heat tiles. That's all that was done. Just a mathematical analysis. How is that acceptable? I'll tell you, I am not made for earbuds. My ears are not well set up for them. Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, so just to get on with the story, the there was no examination made of the shuttle. If they had just taken a moment to have a look, done an EVA, done anything else to take a quick look at the wing, they would have seen substantial damage to the shuttle's wing and extensive damage to the heat tiles, far more serious than the shuttle could possibly have survived. And of course, the question would be asked, well, how would we have gotten them back down? Well, we absolutely could have gotten them back down. It would have been risky and it would have never been done before, but we had a plan for this sort of thing. The Endeavor was ready to launch. Granted, there would have had to have been a number of steps that would have had to have been skipped, and the possibility of losing the Endeavor certainly existed. But nevertheless, if we had carried out a successful rescue of the Columbia crew with the Endeavor, as we should have done, Imagine how different the dialogue would have been. Imagine how different the story would have been. A rescue carried out in space, one space shuttle rescuing the other, and seven lives having been saved instead of unnecessarily sacrificed. That's what should have happened, but it didn't happen. So as a result, we had yet another tragedy. And of course, a change in policies. And that's good that the change was made, but nevertheless, a little late in the day, in my opinion. Again, we should have had greater respect for these things. A greater sense of respect should be paid to space travel. Space travel is always going to be dangerous. Space travel is always going to be fraught with risk. It's as simple as that. And that should never be forgotten. It will never be a routine thing. Think of all of the precautionary measures that are taken on the part of commercial airliners to make sure everything is being done safely. We have to take that, multiply that by 100, and apply that to space travel. Every time human beings go up, there should be no exceptions. Gary Tano, I remember Brian Gumble on NBC saying, let's get this turkey off the ground already, from which the media have yet to learn the negative influence they can have on spaceflight. Very true. The media did all sorts of unforgivable things during the Challenger situation. I remember, and I will never forget to this day, the play by play analysis that was given of Krista McAuliffe's parents' reaction to the explosion, the look of, of whatever sort of look they had. I won't begin to make an assumption as to what emotions they were feeling at that moment, but that didn't stop the media from doing it. They were giving play by play commentary on what emotions they thought they were feeling at the time. Are you kidding me? Seriously. What is wrong with you people? And yet, that is the sort of media culture we have. We want to crawl into the minds of these people, just to get ratings, just to get commercial dollars. It is reprehensible. PulseJet, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support. Johnny Spacer, wow, coming through in a huge way. My mind is blown as to how generous you guys have been during this particular event. Wow, just mind blowing. By the way, guys, please follow me on Twitter. Please like, please subscribe. We are more than a third of the way to the $1,000 goal. And by the way, once again, I wasn't planning on getting to $1,000 today. I was looking for it by the end of February, and we're already over 1/3 of the way to our goal. Mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. And once again, guys, keep in mind that all of this is tax deductible. So, but yeah, it is sad to have to, to bring up these things, to sound bitter about these kinds of events. In retrospect, it's very, very easy, after all, to be, as we call it here in the United States, an armchair quarterback, and say, yeah, they should have done this, they should have done that. It's easy for us to say when we weren't the ones calling the shots. But at the same time, if it was me sitting in that chair, exercising extreme caution would have been the primary thing that I would have wanted to do, especially with Challenger. Especially with Challenger, with Krista McAuliffe on board. No risks should have been undertaken whatsoever. And instead, a unbelievably foolish risk was taken in that situation, in the face of unanimous opposition from the engineers at Morton Thiokol. How that happened, I can't begin to understand, and I will never be able to understand. But we should also learn from these mistakes, learn from this sense of hubris in the past, and move forward with it. Understand the fact that space travel is a very, very dangerous occupation. And what happened to the space shuttles, what happened to Challenger, what happened to Columbia could definitely happen to a human rated starship. Yes, there is greater. All right, we seem to be having a couple of issues here. Video can be a little dicey here because my technician, essentially my partner in crime, he operates Yorkshire in the UK, so transatlantic. Trying to do this across the ocean is not an easy thing to do. When I relocate to Britain, it will change things. Marina says, I remember I asked our American engineer and physicist, John, bring a movie called Mission Control about Apollo mission control. It's a great movie. You talked about the Apollo 1 disaster. Yes, and one that we should not forget. One that we should definitely never forget. To go back to what I was saying, though, what happened, regardless of the complexity of the shuttle, regardless of how, it was riding not only the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge of technology. And it was, just a very, very unsafe vehicle to begin with. Perhaps Starship is going to be a lot safer. That's the way it's being designed. But there are things that need to be remembered. Right now, we don't have any escape system, no abort system for Starship, just like the shuttle. So if anything does go wrong, it could be a grim situation indeed for those on board the Starship. On top of that, we're talking significantly more than 7 people's lives at risk here, a lot more than that. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that there is an extensive deluge system being planned for Starship. That is something that is an absolute necessity because we are talking about the most powerful rocket in human history by far. We're talking double the thrust of Saturn V. Consequently, if you don't have a very good deluge system designed to suppress the sound waves that will reflect or reverberate from the ground and back up onto the ship, you are going to lose your heat tiles. They will be shaken free, consequently. And so, as a result, we need to have a very, very good deluge system in place in order to make sure that the sound issues generated by the most powerful rocket in history are kept in check. And that is one of just a number of things that are going to have to be taken care of. And yes, I am heading to the UK. The reason for that is, once again, that I want to continue. I want to increase the amount of on the spot coverage of European private spaceflight companies, both in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. I have an interview coming up, by the way, with a German launch provider this week, just coming up. And I'll tell you something, there is so much private spaceflight coming out of Europe that isn't receiving enough attention and enough coverage. To my knowledge, there are no major YouTube channels in that cover spaceflight exclusively, anyway, in the United Kingdom. Precious few in Europe in general. And I think that these events doesn't need to just be the occasional video about European private spaceflight. We need to have on the spot live streaming of engine tests and these launches that are coming up, quite a few of them in 2022. All of this needs to be done on the spot. So as a result, since there are so few people on YouTube that are covering this, so little journalistic attention being paid to this, I intend to carry some of this out. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that I'm shifting my attention away from what's happening in the United States. Keep in mind that, of course, I have many, many contacts here. It's very easy for me to come back to the U.S., to stay here for free, that sort of thing. So I can return pretty much at will, and all I have to worry about is the plane ticket from Heathrow. So really not a big issue to come back to the US to cover these sorts of things, and I intend to do it. Yes, Ed Harris and his performance in the Apollo 13 mission. Imagine the Columbia disaster and how that could have been turned into another Apollo 13 with the Atlantis, rather, not the Endeavor, but the Atlantis going up and rescuing those astronauts against all odds. That would be an amazing thing indeed. And yes, you're right, Pulse Jet. The Challenger thing should definitely never have happened. They definitely knew about the problem. And as I said before, Morton Thiokol had, their engineering staff unanimously concluded that it was not safe to launch that day, and they believed that the shuttle was going to blow up on the pad. And it is just a pure stroke of luck that it did not. Robert, we continue to have some video issues. Once again, the fact that it's transatlantic, that does create some problems here. It's a problem that will be rectified once I'm in the United Kingdom. All right, so moving on. Once again, let's. I'm going to go ahead and just to reemphasize, we have raised a substantial amount of money for this project for the never take for granted the sacrifice of heroes, something that we should definitely keep in mind. Once again, that was from Senator McCain, the late Senator McCain, and his comment that he made about Colombia. And one that is not commonly quoted, but I think was a very powerful statement. So we are raising money for the Astronauts Foundation for training young people in the sciences, in engineering. Guys, I do apologize. We continue to have more problems with this, but once again, I want to go ahead and recall the individuals who were lost in Columbia and Challenger a second time, since a lot of you, I think, joined a little bit later on. William McCool, Michael Anderson, Laurel Clark, Ilan Ramon, who once again, I may be mispronouncing that, but it's again an Israeli astronaut, the only non American to die in this particular incident. A lot of people don't realize this, not exclusively an American tragedy. Kalpana Chawla, by the way, the very first woman of Indian descent who went up on a shuttle or went into space, period. And sadly, she was lost as well. Rick Husband, Gregory Jarvis, Michael J. Smith, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Krista McAuliffe. I once again, don't nobody forget that. Anybody who experienced that in person, anybody who's, and this is bringing back a lot, I have to admit, right now at this particular moment. It was just an awful thing, both events in the history of space flight. We can expect to lose people during this process, that it is incredibly dangerous, that space flight is always going to be dangerous. But that having been said, um, it's that doesn't mean that we can excuse hubris, and that doesn't mean that we can excuse carelessness. And in both cases, these problems were avoidable. Brandon, thank you so much for your donation. Really do appreciate that. I am saying that right. Good. I'm glad to hear. Remember that. I was pretty sure I was remembering that correctly. Nevertheless, I'm about ready to close. If you will be so kind as to join all of me in, or join me rather, for all of you rather. I'm getting a bit choked up here. All of you to join me in a moment of silence for these 14 people and for all of those who have given their lives in the exploration of space. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for everything that you've done, for your generosity during this particular event. Once again, keep in mind, Carl Magnus, thank you so much for your donation. Keep in mind, once again, this is a fundraiser that goes on until the end of February, and I will have other videos that will be dedicated towards this fundraiser, and I will also be advertising it as time goes on. And also keep in mind any sort of advertising monetization associated with this video, all of that will go towards this charity as well. So until we come to a point to where everyone at NASA, everyone associated with space flight remembers just how dangerous this is and how precious human life is and the risk that these people are taking every single day, every time they go up there. Astronauts are risking their lives. And until this is properly appreciated and every possible precaution is taken to protect these people from future tragedies and to keep these things from happening ever again, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.